I want to thank you all for joining this panel discussion. My name is Anton Janssen. I come from North Carolina, and I work for a company called Peadar. I'm the manager of legal affairs and risk management. And I also have with me Peter Duffy, the chairman of Risk Management International.
My name is Peadar Duffy. I'm the founder and chairman of a company called RMI, Risk Management International, here in Ireland. RMI has been in existence for some 20 years now. We are essentially a board risks advisory. Our services range from a menu of services in the area of risk governance through to threat research and intelligence. And we have what we call the RMI Risk Resilience Continuum that can be found on our website at rmi.ie. Our perspective on risk, and I suppose you'll see it in the thoughts I will share with you, are substantially influenced by our experience as advisors through, at this stage now, hundreds of board level incidents and deep board level involvement with chairmen and CEOs of companies, a lot of them EMEA regional directors, people saying, from our foreign direct investment companies here, people wondering, on a Sunday morning when the newspapers are hitting their desks and saying, how did I get here? We thought we did everything right. We thought we asked all the right questions, and they didn't. So our perspective on risk is very much one of working out what works and what doesn't work. But myself, I spent a couple of years in the US where I worked with some very fine folk on COSO 2, putting together a service model where essentially we tried to work out, within these hundreds of pages of the COSO document itself and supporting material, what really is it asking people to do? We actually discerned 70 discrete things that people had to do, and maybe 100 in total, because certain things repeated more than once. Here in Ireland, I'm a member of the National Standards Authority of Ireland Expert Committee on Risk, and that body, that NSAI, that is the body which represents Ireland within the ISO framework. So I'm deeply familiar with, for example, 4360, of course, and 31000. Thank you.
Wow, very good. You have a lot of experience with implementing enterprise risk and strategic risk management. What would you say is one of the keys in the success of implementing it that you have seen?
I suppose my perspective is, in this day and age, and even for the last decade, it really has never been too difficult to get board level interest and involvement in the whole matter of risk. However, it's a different thing getting board level traction. And the difference between the two is that board level traction is all about saying, okay, let's take out the strategic plan and trying to discern from the high level aspirational statements, the high level goals, what are the actual objectives? And then getting into a series of mapping exercises on mapping objectives, mapping what matters most to the achievement of those objectives. Is it customer service, profitability, cash, what? And then, of course, getting to the critical point of, mapping our desire to take particular risks in pursuit of superior returns and our ability to absorb things if they go wrong. Senior people quite often don't like that level of detailed interrogation. And the biggest challenge, it's getting moderately easier now because more of the non-exec directors are demanding that better discussions, deeper questioning is taking place at the board level. So it's all about, risk starting at the top as distinct from risk being driven from the end up at the process level up. I conclude by saying we have a test in RMI, a little rule set in RMI. It's called the tell me, show me, prove it to me rule. Very senior people, you'd give them 8, 9 out of 10. The processes are in place. The policies are in place. The strategic plans are in place, as you'd expect in good organizations. But then the show me rule, people go from 9 out of 10 down to 5 or 6 out of 10. Why? You ask people, describe the journey of the information from risk owners out in the organization to when it ultimately ended up on the register, the risk register. So many organizations have risk registers that are little more than just lists of risks because they're not linked back into objectives and they just don't fit. And that's why quite often everything is fine up until the point you get to the boardroom door. Once you get beyond the boardroom door, there's a different dynamic and a disconnect quite often. And then finally on the prove it to me rule, I'd say, okay, bring me to, a risk owner. Leave me alone with that risk owner. And I want to find out from that person, what have they done in the context of the whole process level stuff. And what you find invariably, and now at this point we're at 1, 2 out of 10, what you find invariably is that the people who populate the risk register, the people who the risk framework and all those committees, they're more risk functionaries than they are risk owners. And that's a problem. But I think, we're getting better as we go along.
Absolutely. Very good. What would you advise people? There are people that have a lot of experience with risk management, some not as much. What would you advise people that just start rolling out risk management in their company?
Whether a company is greenfield or brownfield in getting the risk management framework up and running, greenfield meaning, they don't exist on a maturity curve, and brownfield meaning they're at just below the midway point. I think the most important question to ask of the triumvirate, the chairman, the CEO, and that non-exec director who is chair of the audit committee with the charter extension to risk, or the risk committee, whichever way the company has set it up, there's really only one question to ask. Do you want risk as a built-in, or do you want risk as a bolt-on? I would use the kind of philosophical approach and the different approach that between the original American and Japanese method of car manufacture. I'm kind of paraphrasing here now and truncating it, but essentially the American system was one of cars on the production line, and the best guys were at the end of the production line. These were the quality assurance guys that would check the cars and decide which ones would go on out to the market and which ones would come back to fix something that wasn't quite right. The Japanese, on the other hand, said no. At every step in the process, we will ensure that our best people are there, making sure that everything is being done the right way all of the time. That's the difference between built-in and bolt-on. You're either bolting risk functions at the end, or everybody in the process at every layer of the organization are involved in thinking about, where am I going? Where do I want to get to? What can stop me? What can slow me down? Do I want to go faster? If I want to go faster, of course I need better brakes, meaning risk and so forth. That's the difference between bolt-on and built-in. Too many organizations really, they start at the end. They start at the process level, and we end up with lists of risks, but they don't start asking the question at the level of the board, going back to, where are we going, mapping our objectives, mapping what really matters to the achievement of each objective. And, those discussions, whether they're held internally or externally, it doesn't really matter. They're very, this is really just organized common sense. There's nothing very complex about it, though sometimes we as risk professionals, we like to talk with a lot of jargon, but realistically speaking, unless you can bring the discussions down to their simplest, you're blind. You have documentation, but you really don't have any effective risk systems and so forth. So I say, start at the start, decide, is it built in or bolted on risk that you want? That'd be the first question that I would ask. And if you get the right answer, then you're going to succeed ultimately and have a safer environment and more consistently achieving your objectives. I think in practical terms, I find that a lot of people have difficulty in understanding the difference between value creation and value preservation, oddly enough. But if you break things down to, again, what I was saying earlier, where do we want to get to? We know where we want to get to. There are a number of things we have to do to get there. Some of those things are defensive in nature, in order to allow our primary resources to achieve a given aim and goal and so forth. But if we strip the conversation back to, at the board level, what are we trying to achieve? At the executive board level, right down to the organizational unit, asking those people, what is it we need to do? And invariably, they'll end up saying, well, you know, they'll list a range of things, and it'll be easy enough to categorize them into those which are, you know, simplistically value creation. But you couldn't do those things if you weren't being defensive as well, which is the value preservation piece, I suppose.
I just want to talk a little bit about the area of emerging risk. Peadar, you know, could the economy be actually also considered emerging risk? I know that in 2008 with the financial crisis, although, you know, certainly it could have been identified, you know, what was going on and so on. You know, certainly the proper controls were not in place. At the same time, the economy is always something that's ongoing and developing in different directions, and always unexpected things happen. So what's your take on that, and how could a company put proper controls in place to being able to, you know, even in economic downtimes and so on?
Yeah, that's a good question. And in trying to provide an answer that would have meaning for everybody, I make reference to the earlier this year, the report produced in Davos, the 2013 risk report out of the World Economic Forum. And I thought there were a couple of interesting things there. We had the emphasis on the recognition of our hyper-connected, multi-speed, uncertain world, and the advisory in that report for countries and for those macro level international organizations is to concentrate on organizational resilience. Robert Kaplan, who of course is the, you know, noted for the great work in the whole area of the balanced scorecard, his papers were largely influential in setting the tone of the Davos report, and he now has, you know, recommends 3 categories of risk, and essentially as preventable risks, the kind of people, systems, process type risks. The second being the strategic risks, right into Chris's area of expertise, you know, the risks that we decide we're going to take in pursuit of superior returns, and we've weighed things up. We know a lot about those risks, so we're going to take them because we decided we want to increase profit, market share, whatever. But then he also talks of external risks. That is to say, the risks which are beyond our ability even to foresee quite often, certainly our ability to manage. And really what he was saying was, and I would really recommend people to get that report, it's a superb report, and the whole sense of it is that the world is now so much smaller, so much more uncertain, that no amount of planning really can prepare us for the shocks and surprises that can happen in one part of the world and precipitate disaster on us just hours later, be it a weather-related event or a major supplier falling over. So the whole emphasis there in terms of resilience is, you know, again, I go back to my military service days, where we would always try and anticipate what's the most likely avenue of enemy approach. And invariably it work out, you know, this route or the other. And largely speaking, you can do that as well in the context of, you know, what are the bands of scenarios that we could reasonably anticipate. And of course, in the military, you're in the business of putting yourself in danger because you need to achieve an objective. Equally in businesses, we're in the business of taking risk. I mean, what's the purpose of a company? The purpose of a company is to take risk in a manner that the shareholders are protected in terms of legal liability and so forth. So you are putting yourself in danger, you're taking risk in pursuit of superior returns. But equally in the military, you're saying, don't be where you shouldn't be ready. So sometimes companies need to temper their pace of growth. Remember, anything over 5 or 8% is risk, real risk, right? And so many, the investment community put sometimes very, very, you know, unwise pressures on companies to perform above the level that can reasonably be expected. You know, our species, we are a part of nature. There are ebbs and flows. And so in terms of organization resilience, we need to make sure that management are always in a position to deliver credible solutions no matter what happens. be in a position to deliver those credible solutions, restore confidence, and enhance reputation. And I sign off at this point. This really is not new thinking. This is just organized common sense. Back in 1996, there was a study done by Dr. Deborah Pretty and Rory McKnight. I think it was for Sedgwick, in fact. At the time, they were in Oxford. At the time, they're now in Oxford Metrica. And they produced a very fine report on catastrophe, impact on shareholder value. And they discerned direct factors and indirect factors that would have influenced a company's survival following an event. And the indirect factors are the ones that I'm referring to just now. Management, how they perform, how they demonstrate hitherto kind of undemonstrated strengths or weaknesses, perhaps. So delivering credible solutions, always being able to do that, enhancing reputation and restoring confidence. So, you know, it's about being pretty sensible and practical at the more senior levels. Are we putting unrealistic demands on our organization? Can it take that strain? So the more volatile the environment, the more careful you need to be.
Could you expand some more on risk intelligence?
Yeah, I mean, risk intelligence, I guess that's the piece that you asked me to maybe respond to. One of the forums within the Symposium that I'm keeping an eye on is the one that talks about capability and maturity. And one of the contributors there made reference to the Carnegie Mellon maturity model. And that's something, my organization, we tend not to like isms. So we don't like PwC isms or RMI isms or whatever. We advocate, let's go to a professional, independent, third party, be it academia, be it the likes of ISO, and what do they advocate? And I think the Carnegie Mellon maturity capability model is one that people should study and see where they're mapped to it. And on the 5 steps within that model, we have yet to find a company that is demonstrably, credibly at level 3, let alone getting on to level 4 or 5. Most are sadly stuck at level 2. They don't have the systems. They tend to be kind of process rich, but systems poor. Very, very, mile wide, inch thick levels of capability.
Thank you very much. My last question, where do you see risk management go in 3 to 5 years?
Well, I think where it's going for sure is built-in resilience. That's risk in the future. I think where it's come from 20 years ago, the risk was all about kind of, hazards, insurance type stuff. We saw maybe 15 years ago 2 superior studies, one out of Mercer and the other, I guess, was Booz at the time, was on Hamilton. They did different studies, separate studies on the big cap companies, 1.5 billion upwards, and on their major value collapsing events. And they tracked, in their studies rather, they determined quite conclusively that over 90% of the value collapse events were precipitated by strategic and major operational risks, major operational issues that had massive strategic impact. And today, the world is just a different place from the early 2000s. I think 99 is the year in which one of those 2 reports is done, where speed, hyperconnectivity has made the place so uncertain. So I think where risk is going, it's going to be built in, for sure. We're going to have better, deeper questioning at the board level, and a demand. And this is to Tim Leach's point on the whole question of demand-driven risk. Boards wanting to know that the right questions are being asked, and a role for us risk professionals. Professionally assisted interrogation of the answers. But ultimately not for risk's sake, but for the sake of being resilient, to account for those emerging threats. Chris, the point you made reference to those in your great presentation, be they economic, be they cyber, for example, related. I think it's heading in the resilience direction for sure, and built in, not bolted on. And I think that we're going to see a very sharp progression over the next 2 to 5 years in that regard.
Well, I want to thank you for your time and great insight that you provided today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You.